Wade Harrow's calloused fingers tightened around his cards as the saloon owner threw a young woman onto the poker table like she was nothing more than currency. The girl's amber eyes blazed with defiance even as rope burns marked her wrists. And something fierce twisted in Wade's chest that had nothing to do with the whiskey burning his throat. "Her name's Mercy Caldwell," sneered Tobias Grimm, adjusting his gold tooth with his tongue. "Worth more than your horse? Outlaw. You fold now? Or do you think your reputation can buy you a piece of something this fine?" Wade had ridden into Dust Haven with a bounty on his head and lead in his saddlebags, but he'd never expected to find himself staring into the eyes of a woman who looked ready to spit fire at anyone who dared claim ownership over her soul. Mercy's dark hair had come loose from whatever arrangement it had been forced into, framing a face that was equal parts beautiful and fierce. The other players around the table, cattle, Baron named Cornelius Blackthorne and a traveling merchant called Ezekiel Slade leaned back in their chairs, sensing the shift in Wade's demeanor. They'd heard the stories. Wade Harrow didn't just rob banks and trains. He had a code that made him more dangerous than any common criminal. "She ain't property," Wade said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much injustice in his 32 years. Tobias laughed, the sound grating against the smoky air. "Everything's property if you've got the right price. Harrow, the girl's daddy owed me more than he could pay before he caught himself a bullet in a range war. She's working off his debt, one way or another." Mercy's chin lifted defiantly. "I'd rather die than be owned by any of you cowards." Wade studied his cards, 3 aces and a pair of kings. A full house that could change everything. But it wasn't the cards that made his decision. It was the way Mercy looked at him, not with hope, but with the expectation that he'd be just like every other man who'd tried to break her spirit. "I'll see your bet," Wade said, pushing his horse's papers forward, "and raise you everything I own." The room went deadly silent. Wade Harrow was betting his freedom, his horse, his guns, and the gold he'd taken from the Merchant's Bank in Silver Creek. Everything that kept him alive in a world that wanted him dead or behind bars. Tobias's eyes glittered with greed. "You're bluffing, outlaw? Try me." The cards fell. Wade's full house beat Tobias's straight, and just like that, Mercy Caldwell belonged to the most wanted man in 3 territories. But as Wade stood and extended his hand to help her down from the table, she slapped it away. "I don't need another master," she hissed. Wade tipped his hat, his green eyes serious. "Good thing I ain't looking to be one, Miss Caldwell. You're free to go wherever you please." For the first time since being thrown onto that table, Mercy looked genuinely surprised. Mercy stood in the dusty street outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched. Wade Harrow checked the cinch on his horse's saddle. 3 days had passed since he'd won her freedom at cards, and she still couldn't figure out his angle. Men like him didn't just walk away from something they'd paid for, especially not when they'd bet everything they owned. "You planning to stand there all morning, or are you coming?" Wade called over his shoulder, not bothering to look at her directly. "Coming where?" Mercy shot back, though she found herself taking a step toward him despite her better judgment. "Away. From here, before Grimm figures out another way to get his hooks back in you." Wade finally turned, his weathered face serious under the brim of his black hat. Man like that doesn't give up easy on what he thinks belongs to him. Mercy rapped, her arms around herself, feeling suddenly exposed in the morning light. She'd spent 2 years working off her father's debt, serving drinks to men who looked at her like she was dessert, dodging, grabbing hands, and crude suggestions. Freedom felt too big, too impossible to trust. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Why did you really do it? Wade was quiet for a long moment, running his hand along his horse's neck. Had a sister once, Evangeline. She got caught up with the wrong sort of man when I was off trying to make something of myself in California. By the time I came home, ... His jaw tightened. Let's just say, I know what it looks like when someone's fighting for their soul. The admission hung between them like smoke. Mercy had expected him to say something crude about wanting her for himself, or maybe that he had plans to sell her somewhere else. She hadn't expected grief, raw and honest. As an open wound, I can take care of myself, she said, but there was less fire in it than before. I'm sure you can. But Grim's got friends in this town, and they'll come looking once they realize you're not scrubbing floors at the saloon anymore. Wade swung up into his saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. There's a town called Redemption Springs, about 2 days' ride north. Heard they're looking for a school teacher. Not a school teacher. You can read, can't write. Mercy nodded grudgingly. Then you're more qualified than most folks out here. Wade touched the brim of his hat. Horse is yours if you want him. Name's Jasper. He's got good sense and won't throw you unless you give him reason. He was leaving. The realization hit Mercy like a physical blow, though she couldn't understand. Why? Wade Harrow was an outlaw with a price on his head. Being around him was dangerous for both of them. This was exactly what she should want. Where will you go? She found herself asking. Wade's smile was crooked, transforming his hard features. Somewhere they ain't heard of Wade Harrow yet. Maybe I'll try being someone else for a while. A gunshot cracked through the morning air, followed by shouting from the direction of the saloon. Wade's hand went instinctively to his Colt, and Mercy felt her stomach drop. Tobias Grimm appeared at the end of the street with 3 of his men. All armed and looking like they meant business. Looks like they figured it out sooner than I thought, Wade muttered. You still got time to run, Mercy. Instead of running, Mercy grabbed the reins of the horse Wade had given her and swung up into the saddle with more determination than grace. I'm tired of running from men like Grimm. Wade's green eyes lit up with something that might have been admiration. In that case, Miss Caldwell, I suggest you hold on tight. The chase through Devil's Canyon tested both horses and riders as bullets whined off the red rock walls around them. Mercy had never ridden so hard or so fast, but she kept pace with Wade as they navigated the treacherous paths that wound between towering stone spires. Behind them, Tobias Grimm's voice echoed off the canyon walls, promising violence and worse. To anyone who helped the outlaw and his stolen property, there. Wade pointed toward a narrow crevice in the rock face that looked barely wide enough for a horse to squeeze through. Can you make it? Mercy didn't answer with words. She leaned forward over Jasper's neck and sent the horse racing toward the gap. The gelding responded to her urgency, its hooves finding purchase on the loose stone as they disappeared into the shadows between the rocks. Wade followed seconds later, just as Grimm and his men rounded the bend behind them. The crevice opened into a hidden valley that Wade had discovered years ago during another desperate flight from the law. A natural spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a small oasis surrounded by cottonwoods and wildflowers. How did you know about this place? Mercy asked, sliding down from her horse and immediately going to check his legs for cuts from the sharp rocks. You learn to find the hidden spots when half the territory wants you dead or alive. Wade replied, but he was watching her tend to the horse with an expression she couldn't quite read. You ride like someone who grew up on horseback, my father. Raised horses before, ... Mercy's voice trailed off. Before the drought killed half his stock. Before he got desperate and started gambling with money he didn't have. Before the range war that left him dead and her indentured to Tobias Grimm. Wade seemed to understand without her having to explain. He began unsaddling his own mount, a big, black stallion that had carried him through more scrapes than he cared to count. We'll rest here tonight. Grimm's men won't find that entrance unless they know to look for it. As the sun set behind the canyon walls, painting the sky the color of roses and gold, Mercy found herself sitting beside a small campfire, sharing hardtack and jerky with the most wanted man in 3 territories. Wade had removed his hat, revealing dark hair that was longer than fashionable and streaked with early silver at the temples. You could have kept riding, Mercy said quietly. When Grimm showed up this morning, you could have left me to face him alone. Wade poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. Could have didn't seem right, though. Besides, he glanced at her with that crooked smile. You look like you were ready to take on all 4 of them by yourself. I've been angry for a long time, Mercy admitted. Angry at my father for leaving me with his debts. Angry at men who think they can own another person. Angry at myself for not fighting harder. Anger ain't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you breathing when the world's trying to crush you flat. Wade's voice was rough with experience. But it'll eat you alive if you Let it. Mercy studied his profile in the firelight, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of too many hard years. Is that what happened to you? The anger ate you alive. Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of pretending to be something I wasn't. Wade met her gaze across the flames. After Evangeline died, I figured if the world wanted a villain, I'd give them one. Easier than trying to be a hero when nobody believes in heroes anymore. I don't think you're a villain, Mercy said softly. Wade laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tell that to the banks I robbed. Tell that to the men I killed. Did they deserve it? The question hung in the air between them. Wade was quiet for so long that Mercy thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Every last one of them. Later, as they settled down to sleep on opposite sides of the dying fire, Mercy found herself staring up at the stars visible through the canyon opening. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than anger burning in her chest. It was dangerous and foolish. But she couldn't deny it any longer. She was falling in love with Wade Harrow. Dawn came too early and brought with it the sound of riders in the distance. Wade was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun, as he listened to the echoes bouncing off the canyon walls. Mercy sat up, her hair falling in waves around her shoulders. And Wade felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the approaching danger. How many? She whispered. More than yesterday. Grim must have sent word to the territorial marshal. Wade began breaking camp with practiced efficiency. We need to move now. They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and old Indian paths that Wade had learned during his years of running from the law. But their pursuers were persistent, and by midday it was clear they were being hemmed in, driven toward the settlement of Broken Creek like cattle to slaughter. There's nowhere else to go, Wade said grimly, as they crested a hill and saw the town spread out below them. They've got us boxed in. Mercy's amber eyes were fierce with determination. Then we go through. Mercy, no. These people ... They'll turn us over to Grim for the bounty money. It's not safe. Nothing about this is safe, Wade, but I'm not spending another day of my life running from men like Tobias Grimm. She spurred Jasper forward before Wade could stop her, riding straight down the main street of Broken Creek with her head held high. The townspeople stopped what they were doing to stare as the notorious Wade Harrow followed the beautiful young woman into their midst. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, and men stepped back from the hitching posts as Wade's reputation preceded him like a dark cloud. They pulled up in front of the general store, where a woman with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes was sweeping her front porch. She looked up at them with curiosity rather than fear, taking in Mercy's torn dress and Wade's travel-stained clothes. You folks look like you could use some help, she said quietly. Ma'am, I'm Wade Harrow, Wade began, but the woman held up her hand. I know who you are. I'm Constance Fletcher. You've saved my brother's ranch from claim jumpers 3 years back, though you probably don't remember. He wrote me about it. She glanced toward the end of town where dust clouds marked their pursuers' approach. How much time do we have? Not much, Wade, admitted. Constance nodded briskly. Samuel, she called to a young man loading supplies into a wagon. Take these folks around back. Martha's got fresh clothes hanging on the line, and there's a pump for washing up. Mrs. Fletcher, you don't understand, Mercy protested. The men chasing us, they're dangerous. We can't ask you to, child. I've been living on the frontier for 20 years. I know dangerous men when I see them, and I also know good ones. Constance's eyes moved between Wade and Mercy, taking in the way they unconsciously moved to protect each other. Sometimes the difference ain't what people think it is. 20 minutes later, Wade barely recognized himself in the mirror. Samuel held up. His hair was trimmed neat, his face clean-shaven for the first time in months. Instead of his usual black hat and duster, he wore the simple clothes of a traveling merchant: brown trousers, white shirt, and a plain vest. But it was Mercy who took his breath away. Martha Fletcher had found her a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and she'd braided her dark hair in a simple style that made her look younger, softer. She could have been any respectable young woman traveling with her husband to start a new life somewhere. "Remember," Constance whispered urgently, as hoofbeats thundered closer, "you're Daniel and Mary Thompson. You're newlyweds heading to California to start a farm. Samuel's going to drive you to the next town over. There's a stage there that can take you further west." "Why are you helping us?" Wade asked. Constance smiled sadly. "Because everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, Mr. Harrow. And because I can see the way you look at that girl. A man doesn't look at a woman like that unless he's planning to spend his life protecting her." Wade felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could respond, Tobias Grimm and 6 armed men rode into Broken Creek like they owned it. Through the store's front window, Wade watched the saloon owner dismount and start questioning townspeople with the casual arrogance of a man used to getting his way through intimidation. Mercy slipped her hand into Wade's, her fingers trembling slightly. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "I want you to know that these past few days, they've been the freest I've ever felt." Wade squeezed her hand, wishing he could find the words to tell her what she'd come to mean to him in such a short time. Outside, Grimm was getting louder, more insistent. Soon he'd start searching buildings. It was time to find out if love could really set them both free. The charade almost worked. Samuel Fletcher had loaded them into his supply wagon and was driving toward the edge of town when Tobias Grimm's sharp eyes caught sight of Mercy's profile beneath the bonnet Martha had given her. The saloon owner's shout of recognition cut through the afternoon air like a blade. "That's her, the Caldwell girl." Wade's hand moved instinctively toward the gun hidden beneath his merchant's coat, but Mercy caught his wrist. "Not here," she whispered urgently. "Too many innocents could get hurt." Samuel Fletcher proved he was made of the same stern stuff as his aunt. Instead of panicking when Grimm's men surrounded the wagon, the young man kept his hands steady on the reins and his voice calm. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, mister. Here's Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They're traveling to California. Like hell they are." Grimm spurred his horse closer, his gold tooth glinting as he smiled. "Get down from that wagon, Mercy. You and your outlaw friend have caused me enough trouble." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. 6 guns were trained on the wagon, and Wade could see more of Grimm's hired guns positioning themselves around the street. Even if he managed to shoot his way out, Mercy would likely be caught in the crossfire. That's when the church bell began to toll. It wasn't Sunday, and there was no service planned, but the bell kept ringing in the steady rhythm that frontier towns used to signal danger. Within minutes, the street was full of townspeople, men, women, and children, all carrying on with their daily business, as if a gang of armed men hadn't just ridden into their midst. "Funny thing about small towns," Constance Fletcher said conversationally as she emerged from her store with a shotgun cradled in her arms. "We tend to look after our own." More townspeople appeared, and Wade realized with growing amazement that every adult was armed. The blacksmith held a hammer that looked like it could crush a skull. The banker had a rifle. Even the preacher's wife was gripping a rolling pin like she knew how to use it. "You folks are making a mistake," Grimm snarled, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "That man's wanted by the territorial marshal. There's a $1,000 bounty on his head." "Seems to me," said the town's sheriff, an older man with steel-gray hair and intelligent eyes, "that there's also a $500 reward for information leading to the arrest of the man who's been smuggling girls across the territorial line for certain unsavory purposes." Grimm's face went white, then red. "You can't prove nothing." "Maybe not. But I can sure hold you for questioning while I send some telegraphs to other towns. See if anyone else has had young women disappear after their families got into debt with Tobias Grimm." The sheriff's smile was cold as winter. "It might take weeks to sort it all out." Wade felt a spark of hope, but Grimm wasn't finished. "The girl belongs to me, legal and proper. Her father signed papers before he died. Indentured servitude was outlawed in this territory 2 years ago." Sheriff replied calmly. "Any such papers would be worth about as much as a Confederate dollar." The crowd murmured approval, and Wade saw several of Grimm's men exchange uncertain glances. They'd signed on to chase down a runaway and an outlaw, not to face down an entire town that had clearly decided to take the law into its own hands. "This ain't over," Grimm spat, but he was already backing his horse away from the wagon. "No, it isn't," Wade said quietly, standing up in the wagon bed despite Mercy's attempt to pull him back down. Because I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of letting men like you hurt innocent people. Wade Harrow stepped down from the wagon, and every eye in the street was on him. He'd spent so many years being the villain in other people's stories that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be the hero in his own. "My name is Wade Harrow," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I've robbed banks and trains, and I've killed men who needed killing. But I've never hurt a woman or a child, and I've never taken anything from folks who couldn't afford to lose it." He looked directly at Tobias Grimm. "You want me? Here I am. But the girl goes free, no matter what happens to me." Mercy jumped down from the wagon, her blue dress rustling as she moved to stand beside Wade. "We go free together, or not at all." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances prepared to make their final stand. Around them, an entire town held its breath, waiting to see if justice would finally triumph over greed and cruelty. Wade reached for Mercy's hand, and she took it without hesitation. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The gunfight lasted exactly 17 seconds, but those 17 seconds changed everything. Wade had faced down plenty of men in his outlaw years, but he'd never fought with someone else's life mattering more than his own. When Grimm went for his gun, Wade moved with a speed and precision that left 3 men dead in the dust and the saloon owner clutching a shattered wrist. "It's over, Grimm," Wade said, his smoking Colt still trained on the man who had terrorized Mercy for 2 long years. "Your kind of justice ends today." The remaining gunmen threw down their weapons without being asked. The town sheriff moved to arrest them while the doctor arrests thin man named Reginald, cross-ended to Grimm's wounded arm with more professionalism than compassion. "There's still the matter of the bounty on your head," the sheriff said quietly. To Wade as the dust settled, Wade nodded, understanding. He'd known this moment would come eventually. "I won't resist arrest." "No." Mercy stepped between Wade and the sheriff, her amber eyes blazing. "He saved this town from those men. He protected all of us. Doesn't that count for something?" Sheriff Morrison Wade had learned his name during the standoff. Looked around at the townspeople who had gathered to witness the end of the drama that had played out on their main street. "What do you folks think? Did you see Wade Harrow here today?" The silence stretched for a moment before Constance Fletcher spoke up. "I saw Daniel Thompson, a traveling merchant who helped defend our town from some very dangerous men." "That's right," agreed Samuel Fletcher. "Never seen this Wade Harrow fellow in my life." By one, the townspeople of Broken Creek echoed the same sentiment. They had never seen Wade Harrow. They had only seen a brave man protecting the woman he loved and standing up to bullies who thought they could terrorize innocent folks. Sheriff Morrison nodded slowly. "Well then, I suppose there's no one here for the territorial marshal to arrest. But I'd suggest Mr. Thompson and his wife continue on to California as planned. Heard it's a good place for folks looking to start fresh." Wade felt something break loose in his chest, a knot of guilt and anger he'd carried for so many years that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "Thank you," he said simply. Meant it more than any words he'd ever spoken. 3 days later, Wade and Mercy stood on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Watching the sun set over waves that stretched to the horizon, they'd been married by a justice of the peace in San Francisco, Daniel and Mary Thompson, starting their new life with new names and old love. "Do you ever regret it?" Mercy asked, her hand resting on Wade's arm as they watched seabirds wheel through the orange and purple sky. "Giving up being Wade Harrow? Some people would say he was the most famous outlaw in 3 territories. Wade Daniel now, though it would take time to get used, too considered the question seriously. Wade Harrow was a man running from his past, convinced he was nothing but the sum of his mistakes. Daniel Thompson is a man building toward his future with the woman he loves beside him. Mercy smiled, and Wade felt his heart skip the same way it had that first day in the poker game, when she'd looked at him like he might be different from all the other men who'd tried to claim her. "I love you, Daniel Thompson. I love you too. Mary Thompson." They'd used the last of Wade's outlaw gold to buy a small ranch in the coastal hills where Mercy could raise the horses she'd always dreamed of breeding. Wade had discovered he had a talent for carpentry, and word was spreading. About the quality of his work? They were building something good together, something clean and honest, and theirs. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to the ocean waves crash against the rocks below, Mercy traced the old bullet scar on Wade's shoulder with her fingertip. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I'm thinking about that poker game. About how Tobias Grimm thought he was trading away something he owned, but really he was setting free something that was never his to begin with." Wade turned to face her, his green eyes serious in the moonlight streaming through their window. "He didn't set you free, Mercy. You were always free. You just needed someone to recognize it." "We set each other free," Mercy whispered, and kissed. Him with all the passion and promise of a woman who had finally found her home. 5 years later, the ranch that everyone knew as the Thompson Place had become one of the most respected horse operations in Northern California. Mercy's mare, Estrella, had produced 3 foals that were already showing the intelligence and spirit their mother was famous for. And buyers came from as far as Arizona to purchase Thompson horses. Wade, who now answered to Daniel so naturally that he sometimes forgot he'd ever been anyone else, had built a reputation as the finest furniture maker between San Francisco and Sacramento. His pieces were sturdy and beautiful, crafted with the same careful attention to detail he'd once applied to planning bank robberies. On a warm April morning, Mercy stood in the doorway of their home, watching Wade teach their 3-year-old daughter, Isabella, how to curry one of the gentler mares. The little girl had inherited her mother's amber eyes and her father's stubborn streak, along with an absolute fearlessness around horses that both thrilled and terrified her parents. "Gentle Bella," Wade murmured, guiding their daughter's small hand along the horse's flank. "Always let them know you're there. Horses don't like surprises, like Mama doesn't like spiders." Isabella asked with the serious curiosity of a child. "Trying to make sense of the world?" Wade laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Something like that, little star." Mercy smiled at the nickname Wade had given their daughter, Isabella Estrella Thompson, their little star, named for the mare who had helped build their new life. The child was the perfect blend of both her parents, beautiful and spirited-like, her mother, but with an underlying strength and protectiveness that came straight from Wade. "Mama?" Isabella caught sight of Mercy and came running on chubby legs, her dark curls bouncing. "Papa's teaching me to brush Daisy." "I saw that, sweetheart. You're doing such a good job." "Ush." Mercy scooped up her daughter, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. It still amazed her sometimes, this life they'd built. The simple joy of a child's laughter, the contentment of daily routines, the deep satisfaction of work well done. Wade approached, wiping his hands on a cloth, and Mercy felt the same flutter in her chest. She'd experienced that first day when he'd looked at her like she was worth more than gold. Some loves burned hot and fast before consuming themselves. What she and Wade shared had only grown stronger and deeper with time. "Mrs. Thompson," he said formally, but his green eyes were twinkling with mischief. "I believe we have a visitor." Mercy looked past him to see a familiar figure dismounting near their front gate. Sheriff Morrison from Broken Creek, looking older, but no less sharp, was tying his horse to the hitching post Wade had carved from a fallen oak. For just a moment. Then Wade's hand found hers, steady and warm, and she remembered that they weren't running anymore. They were home. "Sheriff Morrison," Wade called out, walking forward with Isabella perched on his shoulders. "What brings you all the way to California?" Older man smiled, removing his hat to reveal hair that had gone completely gray in the years since they'd seen him. "Retirement, actually. My wife's got family in San Francisco, and we decided it was time to settle somewhere the winters don't try to kill you." They invited the sheriff in for coffee and fresh biscuits, and he regaled them with stories from Broken Creek. Constance Fletcher had married the preacher and taken over running the school. Samuel had become a successful merchant, expanding his aunt's general store into the finest establishment between Denver and Santa Fe. Tobias Grimm had died in prison 3 years back, trying to escape from a work detail. "There's something else," Sheriff Morrison said, as the afternoon wore on and Isabella played at their feet with wooden horses Wade had carved for her. "I got a letter from the territorial governor last month. He's issuing pardons for certain individuals whose crimes might have been motivated by circumstances beyond their control." Wade went very still. "Sheriff Daniel Thompson is a good man with a good reputation and a beautiful family," Morrison continued calmly. "But Wade Harrow was never as bad as people made him out to be. Turns out half the banks he robbed were foreclosing on family farms illegally. The men he killed were all wanted for various crimes themselves. Sometimes justice takes its own sweet time, but it gets there eventually." He pulled a document from his coat pocket and set it on the table between them. "Official pardon, signed and sealed. Wade Harrow is free to be whoever he wants to be." Ever felt tears prick her eyes as Wade stared at the paper that officially ended a chapter of his life he'd thought would follow him to his grave. Isabella, sensing something important was happening even if she didn't understand what, climbed into her father's lap and patted his cheek with her small hand. "It's okay, Papa," she said solemnly. "Ma says everything turns out right in the end if you're brave enough to wait for it." Wade looked at his daughter, then at his wife, then at the official document that proclaimed him an innocent man. "You know what this means?" he asked Mercy softly. "What? It means I get to marry you all over again? It's time as Wade Harrow, instead of pretending to be someone else?" Mercy laughed through her tears. "Wade Harrow, are you proposing to me again?" "Every day for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "I should probably be heading back to town. Got a hotel room waiting, and my wife will worry if I'm too late." As the sun set over their ranch, their home, their sanctuary, their proof that love really could conquer all, Wade and Mercy stood on their front porch watching. Isabella chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. The little girl's laughter carried on the evening breeze, a sound that represented everything they'd fought for and won. "Do you think she'll understand someday?" Mercy asked, leaning against Wade's shoulder. "About who we used to be before we became her parents?" Wade watched their daughter spin in circles, trying to catch the dancing lights with her bare hands, and smiled. "I think she'll understand that sometimes the best stories start with someone making a bet on love and winning everything that matters." Mercy turned in his arms, and Wade saw their whole future reflected in her amber eyes. More children, perhaps? Definitely more horses. Years of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, punctuated by the beautiful chaos of family life. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was perfect in ways they couldn't have imagined when Wade first threw his cards on that poker table in Dust Haven. Bet everything he owned on the chance to set a captive woman free. Love, it turned out, was the only gamble that always paid off in the end.